Thank you very much. Okay, so welcome everyone. Today is February 3rd, and this is the Master Plan Steering Committee meeting being held in the Selectmen's Meeting Room, and it's past the hour of 7 o'clock. So, for those of you, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to review the changes, comments, or edits that the Planning Board has proposed at their most recent meeting after we had the public presentation of the final document on December 10th. The Planning Board Chairman has given us the opportunity to weigh in and comment on the changes that have been proposed. Everybody should have gotten a copy. If you didn't, I know Kathy had passed them out. There are edits and comments by Kerry, which are the KM edits, and then there's the second page, which is the AP, which is the Amy comments and edits. So what I'm going to ask is that Jeffrey's going to put the original, the final document that was presented on December 10th up on the wall so that you can see what it was and what is being suggested as changing and or editing. Some of it is wordsmithing, some of it is substantive. And the only purpose of tonight is to vote on whether we agree with or we would recommend that they don't change it, and then have some rationale behind it. We have to put it in writing to the planning board for their meeting on the 18th of February. Okay, so we'll try to get through it. What I'd like to do is start by...
Like you start a little background?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, just by way of background, when it became apparent to Fran and I that the planning board was planning on making changes to the document, we had some conversations with the planning board chairman about our opinion that once we had completed the document, that was kind of the end of it. The planning board's position is that ultimately they authorize the beginning of the document, and they have the ability to make changes to the document if they so desire. And as we sort of analyze that, talk to Kathy about it, that fact is true. So we proposed to the planning board chairman that they could discuss those changes at their public meeting on the 21st of January that Fran and I attended, but they would prefer that they didn't then go ahead and vote and implement those changes until the steering committee had a chance to review the changes in a public meeting. The chairman agreed to that and agreed to postpone the date of any vote on any changes until their meeting on the 18th of February. And basically we said we wanted to have a chance to meet with the committee, sort of explain the changes in person. And then the chairman suggested that we file a document with the planning board before the meeting on the 18th with our recommendations on how to proceed with these changes. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is to make sure that everyone's aware of what the changes are, to discuss them, and Jeffrey and Donnie will help us go through that, and then to ultimately come up with what our position is on these changes, and then Fran and I and Kathy will draft a response back to the planning board, and it's our understanding at this point this will be the end of our participation in the plan. Ultimately, the planning board will take our recommendation, make some decision on it, and take some action on February 18th with the plan. So I guess before we start, are there any just kind of questions about how we came to this point and why we're having a meeting we're having tonight?
And I will say then, once that's done, the Board of Selectmen take the next step, which is to appoint the implementation committee, which will take this document and run with it. Okay. All right. So on the KM edits, the first page is, I think she did that just to give us a point of reference, but there were no changes on the first page. So we can go right to the second page, which are the land use recommendations, number 2.2 through 2.4. And I mean, as you can see, that the only change that is being suggested is that instead of update, we're deleting the word update and changing it to the review of the town's zoning bylaws for opportunities to accommodate. So it's a little bit more relaxed. It's not as pointed of a recommendation. So it did, I mean, do people want me to read the old while they're reading the new, or do you want to just look at it?
Can I make a motion? We accept it as the edits as submitted?
Well,
As
you
long as
can, but I
it's-
guess I'd like to just make sure that if there's any discussion beforehand, but sure.
Wow, but if we have to have a lot of discussion about this.
No, oh, okay. All right, thanks, Don. All right.
You're welcome.
Okay. So to get
Come
the ball
on.
rolling, I don't know if everyone has actually looked at the
Oh,
documents
okay.
beforehand, or whether this is their first time looking
be
at them.
quiet.
But again, it is just deleting the word update, adding the word review, and adding the word opportunities. Jason?
No objection to the changes proposed.
Okay, so if no one else has any comments, John has made a motion. Does someone want a second? Okay, so the motion has been seconded to agree or to report back to the planning board that there's no objection to those changes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay, so it was unanimous. Thank you. On land use 2.3, again, the word review is there instead of update for the opportunities to consider instead of to better plan for. Again, to some degree, it is wordsmithing. I know we spent a lot of time wordsmithing, but if does anyone feel it changes the intent or have any concerns?
No.
I do.
John,
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I think the idea was that we wanted to see that, and this says, well, we'll just take a look at it and think about it. I think that's a different emphasis.
Anyone else have any comments about that?
I think so just to give you a little background, each planning board member read the document. This is Kerry's feedback. I didn't have any feedback. Anthony didn't have any feedback. Millie didn't have any feedback. But Amy had feedback. So you're now looking 2 members of the planning board having feedback. I think when she described this, it was rather than if there was a project that came in that they didn't think it fit in the downtown area, that rather than someone coming and saying, it's in your master plan, you must accept it, they wanted the flexibility to say, it doesn't fit where they're proposing it to fit. I think that's probably the rationale. I can't speak for Carrie, she's not here tonight, but I'm thinking that's probably her rationale for, as Fran was saying, making it a little bit looser than you must do it.
Thank you, Michelle. All right. Okay. Anyone else? All right. John, were you motioning to accept it? Okay.
I make a motion that we accept it as
Okay.
written.
Does somebody want to second that?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, so George is opposing it?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yep, everyone else, okay. All right, and then on L2, 4, investigate the merits of instead of investigate density bonuses. So again, this is the same thing as what we just talked about. We're saying we should investigate the density bonuses and density transfers. Their request is, the recommendation is to change it to investigate the possibilities of, and I think there's, investigate the merits of that could promote reasonably higher densities. Again, it's not going to preclude those things from happening, but to Michelle's point, it's not emphatic as either, so it gives the opportunity, but not something that can be pointed at and say you must or shall do. Any concerns or questions?
Same concerns.
Okay, George has the same concerns as the other, which, I mean, I agree with, it's just, I don't think it's gonna stop the implementation committee from moving forward. So, all right, John, are you gonna be my motioner? Well, you started.
I make a motion that we accept it as written.
I second it.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay, there's more than one hand that said opposed?
No,
Oh,
Mark
oh,
was.
Mark and George opposed.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, on the next page, we're going into housing, and this is in the key findings. The original, okay, it's on page 4-2. Okay. The original key finding said, third bullet down, key findings
I think it was a
for,
new bullet.
New bullet.
oh, it's a new bullet, sorry. Additional community priorities include balancing overdevelopment, evaluating the impact of increased development, and protecting the existing character of neighborhoods. And as you can see, the comment was that the chairperson thought that the surveys really did reflect this as a significant priority. In consultation with the consultants, the question was, when you include balancing overdevelopment and evaluating increased development, what are you balancing it against? So it might be just something, if people agree with the sentiment, but it may need to be reworded.
My feeling was that the word overdevelopment is kind of a reach in this, that, you know, the idea of balancing development, I think no one would disagree with. Putting overdevelopment in there kind of adds kind of a
Judgment.
Yeah, a judgment. Yeah.
judgment as to what's going on, so my sense would be that I didn't have a problem with adding this bullet, except that, we could just say additional community priorities include balancing development, evaluating the impact of increased development, and protecting the existing character of neighborhoods. So I would change overdevelopment to development.
The alternative was to leave those and just say evaluate. But again, it's, what is the intent of the changes, and how do people feel about that?
I like, personally, for me, changing it from overdevelopment to development makes sense.
Okay. And what about leaving the, go ahead, Mark, sorry.
It struck me that in the section that the bullet's in of key findings, it's not really consistent with the key finding of the master plan committee. The other bullets deal with fact-based relating to the issue of housing. This is a conclusion or an implementation phase as to whether, in response to these key findings, the impacts of doing something for that need to be weighed.
Right.
But that's different than a finding about it.
It's almost aspirational in a way, yeah.
I have something that, I don't know if it goes along with that line, but in my notes, when I went through all the studies and minutes and everything before the planning board meeting, is there was a note on our May 9th, 2018 minutes where density is a concern that needs further discussion outside the master plan. And that came right from the consultants. So I don't know if that's what Kerry meant, but that's one thing I was thinking of for the key findings, like surveys, the community outreach. There was a lot of discussion of residents concerned with high density, but that never came out as a key finding. So I don't know if it'd be include balancing high density development. I mean, I don't want to change Kerry's word because I don't know what she meant. So I guess you can comment to hers. But with my key finding, I actually was considering, we might have a key finding about how they said density is a concern that needs further discussion. I mean, that should be noted because that's in our minutes, but it's never in the plan anywhere. It came out in all the surveys.
Mark?
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
I think that's a fair point, that at least the comment should be noted in some fashion. I thought and I don't have particular language to propose, but I think it falls better under goal 3, which is on the next page, as far as what they are.
Right.
In which, when you're trying to pursue a housing development strategy that balances demand, and we talked in terms of the capacity to provide services and infrastructure, I think you can add the concept of thinking about impacts on neighborhood, character of neighborhoods to that, in considering how to respond to the demand. But bringing this into the key finding seems to me to start to challenge whether there is a demand or a need for housing.
I think goal 3 actually is on point with this. What is it?
All right, well, so I guess it goes back to.
Because goal 2 states the same thing.
The key, should there be something in the key findings that reflects what is in housing goals 2 and 3 that is not subjective, as it appears this additional bullet people feel may be? I mean, we can certainly write something back to the chairperson of the planning board and say that if the intent is to highlight the fact that there are priorities about development into the key finding, we just felt that the wording of this was too subjective or overreach or whatever people want to say it is.
Yeah, Fran, I don't know if this fits. So for me, and perhaps not for others on the committee that have been more involved with the town recently, I guess it was surprising, maybe not surprising, that there was this dichotomy, right, of we want affordable housing, but we don't want density. I was, sorry, I get amused by irony, so I was a little amused by that. And so I think, honestly, it is in a way a key finding, in my view, as I think about it more, because it is a dichotomy the town has to address and deal with. It's like, you know, it's kind of like an internal issue that needs to be recognized, right? What's the first step? Recognizing there's a problem, right? And the problem is, we want people to be able to retire and be in homes in town, downsize, and yet no one wants density because they view density as being a negative.
Supposing we,
So-
I like Mark's suggestion about moving the thought from the key findings to goal 3. Supposing that we appended at the end of goal 3, it says that balances demand with town's capacity to provide services and infrastructure, and manages density in a way that preserves the existing character of neighborhoods.
I think you can add it there. I think Jason's point is well taken. Goal 2 essentially talks about impact on neighborhood as well.
Right.
It-
It's kind of the same language.
To me, that's the whole issue. It
Yep.
gets to, I think, what John's talking about is, you know, there has to be a balancing of future growth of the housing stock with the impacts on neighborhoods. That's a specific goal with 6 different implementation steps already under it. There needs to be a 7th. I guess we could do it. But I don't know how many times you have to beat the drum.
Well, there's a
Okay.
sense, I think, that they might want to beat the drum a little bit more.
Anyone else that hasn't?
Well, I wanted to add the key finding that high density was a concern of residents. And I know I didn't add it at the planning board meeting, but after thinking about it, I might bring it up in the next planning board meeting. And I wanted to get your input, but high density did come out a lot, so I thought that was a key finding, that high density was a concern in the surveys and in the residents. Not saying that, sure,
Sorry.
yep.
I didn't say anything.
Oh.
I said nothing. Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, okay, all right, sorry. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jason.
I just want to get myself on track, because I'm getting lost in this conversation. The key finding that we were talking about being added refers to overdevelopment, and that was the concern we had about the phrasing of that.
Right.
But Amy, you're referring frequently to high density, and I don't necessarily equate high density with overdevelopment.
Right.
So I just want to be sure that we're talking about the same thing.
Sure.
We're talking about
Sure.
different things, talking
Sure.
about separate.
Okay.
Right, because you can have overdevelopment in non-high density areas, so to that point. So again, all we're gonna do is make recommendation, we don't have to reword it, we don't have to, I mean, we could just write and say that we question, if the intent is to make a key finding that demonstrates the concern about development, either the impact of increased development or overdevelopment, it's too subjective to say balancing overdevelopment. Balancing development, evaluating overdevelopment, something like that. All we can really do is say to, write to the chair of the planning board and say that here's what we found to be inconsistent in this wording. It's going to be up to her whether she changes it or not, or leaves it in the document. Unless somebody actually wants to draft something, you know, right now that we can suggest as that change. Our recommendations back will be to her that we felt that this was an overreach and too subjective. But if the intent is to acknowledge that dichotomy that John's talking about, we don't disagree with that. It's just the wording of it doesn't seem to be
Might
accurate.
we just go back with a suggestion of where else to stick it? That would be what they're looking
Yeah,
Like, just say, well, we don't agree with it in key findings, but put it in G2 or G3.
right, okay.
I'm good with that.
All right,
Would a
Ashley?
simple rewording help, so additional community priorities include balancing increased development, or just include, I think what this is trying to say is that there was a key finding that citizens felt that we need to evaluate increased development and make sure it's balanced appropriately with the growth of our community and what we can handle.
Yep.
I think it just needs to be said better.
Right, well, and that's what we're saying,
Yeah.
yes.
So I think if you, and maybe everyone's gonna think this is too simple, but I think if you simply got rid of the over in overdevelopment, and then evaluating the impact of, get rid of increased, and just say evaluating the impact of development.
Right, because whether it's increased or decreased, the
I mean,
impact
it's-
of development is an impact.
I mean, more,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay,
I mean, I think that gets to what you were just
Yeah.
saying,
Right.
Ashley.
'Cause
Yeah.
it doesn't deny again, then you're balancing something. Additional community priorities include balancing development, evaluating the impact of development, and protecting the existing character of neighborhoods.
Yeah.
I don't wanna make this
How do
over-
people feel about that as a?
Yeah, I
recommendation?
don't want to make it overly complicated. I agree with Mark's comment that if you look at all these, they're sort of factual observations. And this would be, I think, if your language and it said, from surveys and community input,
Oh, yeah,
then it's a factual thing,
right.
right?
Yep.
And I think that kind of speaks to also the chairman of the planning board's comment.
I just as reading it now that you're saying it out loud, balancing, community priorities include balancing development with protection of the existing community character of neighborhoods. I think you could eliminate a lot of words. in
Right.
between.
And adding-
But just
And-
reflect
and
where
adding
that
the-
data
And adding
came from.
that this is based on the surveys and the feedback.
Right.
Okay, how do people feel about that as the recommendation?
I make a motion. Oh, sorry, was
Go ahead.
that premature?
Yeah,
George, should
all
I?
right. Go ahead.
It is? Okay,
It's
all
a
right.
little premature.
Okay, all right, well, if you do, I'll ask for discussion afterwards.
So.
Okay, so John-
How is it gonna go, based on?
Yeah, surveys and community input, surveys and other community input. Right?
Okay.
So that makes it a factual
Was that
thing.
the
that-
only thing we got from surveys and community input? Was that the only overarching point, or did we get other things
Oh,
from there? that
no.
would need
That's
to go in
true.
there? I think it's, again.
Well, that's reflected
subjective.
through the plan, though.
Right.
Yeah,
But I think-
would, that doesn't belong there, is I would
Yeah.
probably say it probably belongs elsewhere.
All right, well, I mean, all we can do is tell her that this is the discussion. I don't think that we have to have a set unless somebody has something that everybody then agrees to.
Well, I think with the words John added in the simplification that's been proposed.
Okay. all right.
Which is what?
So it's saying
What did
that,
y'all
so,
say?
so, based on input from,
Public participation.
well, what were the words used?
No,
Survey?
just surveys and other
Surveys and
community
other
input.
community input.
Right. Priorities include balancing, evaluating the impact of development and protecting the existing character of neighborhoods.
Right,
Right.
okay. Does everybody feel at least comfortable with that as the key finding?
Did you get that then?
I got it.
There you go,
I did.
all right.
I'm looking on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. All right. We're on the next page of housing, and now these are the actual recommendations. Very simply, in housing recommendation number 2, we said explore an inclusionary housing bylaw. The changes, explore the merits of.
I see the difference, to be honest, but
Well, one is saying we'll think about it, the other one is we'll.
we're both thinking about
Right,
it.
yeah.
I remember we went through the wording pretty carefully to make sure that we weren't saying we were gonna do anything in particular, but,
Right.
I mean, if that makes it clearer that we didn't say for sure we'd do it, then that's.
Well, we don't know that it makes it clearer, but there's one member of the planning board that would like it there. But the other 4 members of the planning board have not yet voted on the changes that are being recommended by any 2 individuals on the planning board.
Yeah,
But
I
at
mean,
the
I
moment,
don't-
there's
I
one
don't-
planning board member that wants it.
I don't struggle with this language. I mean, to me, it's a question of, should I go on America's Got Talent? Right? And Jason might say to me, listen, let's review the merits of you doing that, right? So it's just not, I'm going to do it. It's, I need to evaluate, like, does this even
Right.
make sense to do? So I don't really struggle with this language that
Yep.
much, to be honest.
All right, is that a motion?
Yeah, it's a motion, I didn't make a
In all
motion.
likelihood, we might have phrased it that way ourselves in the course of.
That's right. It doesn't really change the intent. Exploring is exploring.
I think what I was saying in terms of making it clear, if the planning board, who's probably gonna be using this more than other
Yeah,
boards in town, feel like that makes it clearer for them, then that's fine. A lot of the, I
Awesome.
mean, a lot of the wordsmithing here didn't really change what was being said, it just
right,
said a little different.
Correct.
I would agree,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, all right, so John made a motion, and did someone second it?
So,
Okay, that was Jason seconding, okay, so, the recommendation is to add the words merits of. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Okay,
I just
so I'm
wanna-
gonna.
I would
just-
kinda
I'm
jump in
gonna-
here now for a
Yeah,
minute.
now I'm gonna let, yeah, that's fine.
I want to talk about these changes proposed in this next section kind of as a group. Basically, I think there was some misunderstanding on the part of the planning board as to the difference between H2.1 and H2.6, and so the recommendations here are to kind of put them together and to recommend that H2.6 kind of happen first before anything happens with H2.1. And then also, one of the things that happens in here is that there's a recommendation to delete the H2.2 that was proposed. The H2.2 that was proposed originally said that there'd be a review of the zoning based on anything that comes out of this. And instead, that was replaced with a new H2.2 that sort of emphasizes the need to consider the senior housing kind of thing. So when we put this all together, at least my assumption was that H2.6 and a housing production plan is a pretty specific project that's done, and most of what comes out of a housing production plan is a recommendation around a path towards state-approved affordable housing, which we like to talk a lot about as being capital A or big A. In other words, affordable housing that the state approves, that goes on the subsidized housing inventory, that's offered to people by lottery making no more than 80% of median income. And typically, a housing production plan sort of gives you a path to do that. And we did one of these in the past prior to the Northborough Crossing development when we were below 10%. And that plan protected us from 40Bs because it lined out steps the town would take over a number of years to get to 10%. And once you had a plan like that in place, you weren't subject to 40Bs. Then the Northborough Crossing and Avalon project came to be, and Avalon pushed us over the top of the 10% affordable housing, capital A need, which sort of to a certain extent made the recommendations in the production plan moot. What didn't happen with Avalon was any real discussion or thought around what we talk about as being small a, which is what is the real need in the town of Northborough for housing that people can really live in, that seniors can afford to live in, that first-time home buyers can afford to live in, that teachers and firemen and police officers can afford to live in. A housing production plan typically doesn't get into that. And so I think it's important to feed back to the planning board that H2.1, unless, if we do another housing production plan, those kinds of questions can be asked and that kind of analysis can be done, that H2.1 has to be kept separate from H2.6. And to a certain extent, they can go on simultaneously. But H2.1 is all about small a. And it really anticipates something like the housing partnership being reformed or some group of local people in town assessing what the really needs are for affordable housing in town that has nothing to do with the 10%. I think we all agree that we're over 10%, although if people don't realize that the way we got to being over 10% was that because the state was trying to encourage rental housing The Avalon project is 382 units of rental housing. 25% of those are affordable. 75% are being rented for rental rates over $2,000 a month, but they all count on the inventory. So in my mind, 75% of those units aren't affordable, but they're in the inventory and they got us over 10%. If you take those 75% of the units out, I'll tell you, the town doesn't have 10% of its housing affordable, but it counts. So you need to keep in mind the difference between big A and little a, and the fact that H21 is an attempt to understand little a, and H26 is an attempt to understand big A.
Okay.
So I think we need to, and I'll just defer to Kathy for a minute to just get a little more feedback about, do we think that if we do another housing production plan, we can make headway on little a or not? And if we can't, I think we need to keep H21 separate from H26 and have them kind of go on parallel tracks.
Well, in your housing production plan, like you said, the one that we did before, which many communities did do this when they knew they had a big project that everything was going to count. You know, we submitted housing production plans to the state and the state approved them, because the state wants to see, obviously, the big A, you know, affordable housing. And, but in a true housing production plan, you're gonna pick a time frame, you know, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 15. I really don't think they go out much further than 10, I don't think. Right, or five is the standard, okay. Where the community has to identify how you are going to create affordable housing. So, I mean, that's what a housing production plan does. And then you need to, the intent is, I mean, if you're gonna do a housing production plan, you know, you have to have intent behind it that you're going to somehow create those units, you know, whether it's, I mean, it could be a number of ways, but whether it's, you know, the town donating land to a developer, but there's restrictions on it that, you know, X amount of units have to be affordable, or, you know, again, inviting in a comprehensive permit, you know, working with any kind of sort of, you know, nonprofit, you know, social group. You know, we've done that with Habitat, but, well, the town hasn't, but an organization has. So a housing production plan means you've committed yourself. You are going to, as a community, you are going to build affordable housing over 5 years.
Is that big A and little a? Or just big A?
No, it would go to both. I mean, because you, unless you were doing a comprehensive permit, you know, you end up getting more housing units.
So you could do big A, little a, and then the little a could be using the inclusionary bylaw, and you could have.
The inclusionary bylaw is big A.
I mean, that's even if you have an inclusionary bylaw.
Right, well,
You
we
know,
talked about it here.
So, I mean, there, you know, and there's some language to, you know, make that not so strong in here.
But to the point where Rick said the H2-1 covers a little a, but what from you just said, it sounds like the housing production plan would do the big A and the little a.
I'm gonna ask, okay, Mark, go ahead.
Do you want to go?
Well, I would just offer that under H2-1, if I understand the intent correctly, it was meant to be a little bit more broader than what you'd find in a housing production plan, to really do some targeted research to figure out where those cost burdens are, understanding who those targets are, and what you do about those specific needs that might fall outside of the small a. So
Yeah, I
a
mean,
deeper, broader dive to figure out what the real problem is.
All right,
That's
Mark?
the way I understood it.
Mark?
I was gonna maybe echo the kind of same thought. Housing production plan is a capitalized term, to me, is a plan that tries to promote housing that's fit for housing, for households having 80% medium.
Right.
It's a defined term of what constitutes affordable. I think a number of these points try to reach something else, which is, you know, sometimes now called in the marketplace workforce housing. It's something that's above that, but still affordable. Rick used the example of municipal workers, for example. And so I think when you mix them together, you're mixing up what the goal is. And I think you're restricting yourself when you do that to the 80%. You're not necessarily achieving goals toward H2-3, the missing middle. You're not, particularly housing production plans as they deal in the senior community based upon what constitutes affordable and assets becomes very tricky in that industry. So you're adding a bunch of weight, but not trying to get to the overall goal, as I understood what we're aiming for, which is a mix of affordability for people in different stages of their life.
Okay. All right, so to simplify, I think the way it was presented by the steering committee, H2.1 and H2.6 were trying to do two different things, or had two different recommendations to achieve the goal number 2 of promoting housing types to accommodate future growth. The wording that is being suggested by the planning board may change that intent. And what we can do is say just that. We don't have to rewrite it. We can just say that it is, in the collective opinion, it changes the intent. If they still want to do it, they can still do it, but the opinion is that it changes it based on the discussion. Amy?
One question I had was for the consultants. Back in January of 2019, there was a paper, we had all sorts of edits on it, and you guys had a point where it said, consultant MG stated, hard to tie price points to housing, suggests something at a higher level. I mean, is that something, I still have that, I have the paper, but
What was
it's,
the MJ?
it says MG. MG? I don't know, but it says consultant stated,
I mean, so,
no, it wasn't, I know, but it wasn't her, but it says,
Yeah.
it says the consultant, and I can pull up my papers, stated, hard to tie price points to housing, suggests something at a higher level. So I was just wondering,
In regard to what specific?
in
H2.1?
H2.1. So I was just wondering if that was one of you guys, and what you would consider a higher level.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at that myself, frankly.
Yeah, I can pull it out for Al.
Okay, well, separate from that, that's not on the table. On
Okay.
the table at the moment are Kerry's recommendations that we include the housing production plan, uppercase HPP, into undertaking a study to understand housing price points.
Right.
Which is more about what is lowercase a affordability. So,
what I would recommend in this section, I would recommend taking out to be considered as part of a more comprehensive housing production plan at the end of
Right.
H2.1. If Kerry would like to make a statement more, making sure we're clear that senior groups and representatives are important, I could agree to append on the end of H2.1, something where it says, determine the types of housing that would meet these price points, to include working with senior groups and representatives to understand and explore housing options that could best accommodate their unique housing needs. I'd have no problem with appending that wording onto H2.1. I'd then recommend that the original H2.2, review the town zoning bylaw to ensure consistency with housing in 2.1, get reinserted. I think when I heard Kerry describe this, she was concerned that somehow this was saying that we needed more changes to the zoning bylaw because of this. I don't think that H2.2 is saying that at all. It's just saying that once we've developed some strategies for housing, we would work with the planning board to see how those things would fit into the zoning, to see if any changes needed to be made, but it certainly didn't presuppose that the zoning bylaw would need to be changed.
okay, but I'm just going to stop you there for a second, because adding the housing production plan to H2.1 does then imply that the zoning bylaws will be reviewed to ensure consistency with that housing study, which we're now calling a housing production plan, and that may not be what she's intending. If the housing production plan is about how are you going to do affordable housing and how are you going to move on it. So let's keep them separate. Let's talk about the seniors separate for the moment. H2.1, as it was originally presented by this committee, do people feel strongly about recommending that the additional wording be included or not included?
Yes.
Based on what we just heard about the housing production plan and what that means, and who was
Not
there?
included.
Not included, and
Okay.
I think, to me, this is a question of definition. It's like, you know, do you just append on to determine the types of housing that would meet these price points, you know, in order to achieve general affordability, not state-defined affordability or affordable housing?
Well, but that's what it is saying, it's just not saying those additional words. But adding the uppercase HPP does not say that, right? Adding the HPP does not say that. So John's recommending that we recommend clarifying the first sentence, the first recommendation. And two people have said that, well, actually more than two people do not agree with the addition of to be considered as part of a more comprehensive housing
Right.
production plan. So let's just focus on that. How do people feel about, with explanation, explaining that it is not agreed that that's good language to have in H21? Okay, I see a nod.
Yeah,
Yes, okay.
agreed.
All right, so I'm going to assume John just made a motion that we recommend that H21
Is this guy?
stay as originally submitted.
Yep.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. And all those opposed? Amy?
Yeah, because I still have more
Okay.
questions.
All right, okay, so that's one opposed, fine. Okay, so now we go on to, the original H22 was again to review the zoning bylaws to make sure that they're consistent, or to ensure that they're consistent with the housing study. It's not changing it, it's just, it is what it's one of the tools. I think Jeffrey said there are many different ways in which you can achieve this. One of them is to see if your zoning would accommodate changes in housing.
Frank,
So-
can I just ask a general question about all what you're going through tonight? My understanding is that you're not here to rewrite
Correct.
these goals and key findings, and, I mean, the master plan steering committee accepted the master plan, with the exception of, I mean, it was not unanimous, but it was just one person
Right.
that voted not to accept it. So your intent tonight is not, you're not rewriting these goals.
Correct.
You are just looking at the changes that Kerry, and then eventually the second document is from Amy.
Yes.
It's just about whether those should be in or not.
That's perfect. Okay, thank you. All right, so that just cuts out
Okay.
half the work. So, all right, so the recommendation and the vote was on H21 to leave as originally written, and we hashed out why. The H22 that was originally in the document was to review the zoning bylaws. How do people feel about keeping that? I'm not saying we're not looking at the one that she's using to replace it, but keeping that as one of the recommendations on how to achieve the goal.
I believe we
Yeah.
should keep it.
Okay,
Yeah, I
Rick
think-
believes we should keep it. Michelle?
Yeah,
Is that
because
enough?
if for some reason out of this, discussion comes that you need an over 55, you have to review your zoning bylaws because we don't have it in it.
Perfect, okay,
Yep.
that's a good
But it didn't have a
example.
reason the first time.
Yeah.
18 was to do
Okay.
it.
So maybe the housing
Alright.
study
Rolling it
says we
out.
should promote housing downtown to increase walkability and things, you may need to look at the zoning bylaw.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay, all right, okay, all right. Sean, did you just motion that we recommend leaving it?
Okay, Fran, this is over the top. I
Okay,
think somebody else can make that.
all right, Michelle,
move
was-
that- I
okay,
move that
Rick
we
is making
leave-
the motion.
That we leave H22 as originally specified in the plan.
Okay.
In the plan.
Anyone second? Jason
Second.
seconded. If no further discussion, all those in favor? Anyone opposed? Amy is opposing?
Only because
You
of
don't have to
two
explain
words,
why, it's fine.
right?
Okay, the H22 that has been added, my comment would be, I don't know why we would separate out the senior groups. I don't think that they are more or less important than our workforce residents who are looking for housing, exploring housing options that would accommodate their needs both financially and bedroom and bathroom wise. Yes, Jason?
I think at some point in our discussions, we even talked about the different segments. As Rick said, seniors, first-time home buyers, the workforce. And I think we kind of consciously decided not to make those distinctions and understand or agree that our affordable housing recommendations or something, in its implementation, we'll examine those in more detail. And we didn't really feel a need, I think, to call out the specific subgroups.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I think I was vehemently opposed because they said, well, there could be people that are not in the workforce and are not seniors that need this, and that's gonna
There you
come
go.
out, so
Okay.
why don't we focus on
Yeah,
one?
All right.
People with disabilities, people
Yeah.
with, there's all kinds that
Right.
can
We
be.
have an understanding that there are a number of different groups for their separate reasons that have a need for affordable housing here in Massachusetts.
Right. Mark?
If one wanted to keep the language and recognize the goal, if you struck senior and substituted advocacy groups, and then struck the term there in the second line, I think it would allow to be consistent that any advocacy group looking for a particular type of housing.
If that was truly the intent, yes. Which we don't know, so, yes,
So I just want to, we've already voted to recommend retaining the original H22.
correct.
And so if we're considering this now, this would be an H27 as
Right.
an.
It would have to be, yes,
It's 2-7.
yes,
Okay.
with its own implementation,
Just so we
yes,
understand.
Yes.
and everything. It
okay,
doesn't ripple through the whole document.
Right.
requiring changes.
Yeah,
right. So, okay, so I wanted to, just want to
I'm
hear,
just-
see if anybody, go ahead, Amy, sorry.
Oh, I was just making a comment. I can't really speak to Carrie, but from what I remember, I think from the planning board, the reason why she added this is because a lot of the surveys were from seniors, and a lot of seniors have reached out to her. So when she went through this, she noticed that there weren't any recommendations to work with the senior group, even though a lot of the original surveys and a lot of the original meetings were seniors who said they wanted to be heard. And so she felt that was missing to work with the senior groups, and that's why she thought it was important to add.
Well,
I'm just,
yeah, I mean, it's
I
possible, but.
agree with Amy, that, I think when Carrie explained this at the planning board meeting on the 21st, that's exactly what she said. She said there was a lot of feedback from senior people about this, and she didn't see any particular reference to it in the plan.
Right, but,
and she felt like if it wasn't there, we're kind of ignoring them, and they took a big part in it, whether it was the surveys or the groups.
I really Say- like
the word advocacy groups.
okay, all right.
It covers so many.
Okay, so someone has to either motion that we recommend broadening it to include all, to advocacy groups, or that we otherwise would not recommend it be included as just a subgroup? Is that what I'm hearing? I think that Norm just made that motion?
I guess I did.
That people, is that what people are hearing? That it either should be not singling out the senior population, or striking it completely? I need to hear something if we're going to make a recommendation. I mean,
I'd be fine having an H27 with the advocacy wording in there. I mean, I think that is an important piece of things. I think, they would have unique housing needs. It's something that should be investigated. I mean, I
okay.
don't see an issue with it,
All
I
right,
guess.
does anybody think it's already part of H21
Yes,
and part of H26
yes.
as a subgroup? Yeah, I mean, who are we doing a housing production plan and a housing price point if it's not for the seniors, the people who live with disabilities, the parents with young children, the firefighters, police officers, school teachers, and everyone else?
Then what we could do is, taking that wording, changing senior advocacy groups, we could take the wording in H22 and put it as the last sentence in H21.
Well, somebody needs to either, again, motion to not recommend including it or including it with different language.
I'll make a motion to reject the proposed language shown here as H22.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, all right. All those in favor? Okay, all those opposed?
I'm gonna wait till the planning board, so I can talk.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
as I said, I mean, we are going through this exercise
Right.
to do our due diligence so that we can make our recommendations known. The planning board, we already know, can do what they want. H25, they added language while maintaining the existing character of downtown neighborhoods. Anybody have any concerns, or, I mean, it's just emphasizing something that we do know was a big word in the word bubble.
No one's proposed additions.
Okay, I hear a motion from Ashley. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Oh, that one was unanimous. Okay, so now we're to H26. where it was just update the town's existing housing production plan. And it's looking to the added language of including present-day information and impact analysis study and the specific senior housing plan. I'm going to ask Jeffrey and or Donnie to talk about a little bit more about the housing production plan. Would it by default include present-day information, impact analysis study, and senior housing?
Yes, so, of course, every HPP would include an update with the data, the latest data from the census, looking at all the demographics, looking at all the income brackets from 80%, under 30% AMI, which is the average mean income, 30% to 80%, and then even above that too. But the focus is going to be below that 80% AMI range. So it's going to include the present day information. One of the components of an HPP is also taking a look at the town's capacity from an infrastructure standpoint. So taking a look at the water, the sewer, public schools, roadways, et cetera, all of the public services to see what can they accommodate in terms of new development, and what would the impact be on new development on those services. So the HPP would include those pieces of information. Specific to the senior housing plan, you don't typically see that because, as we talked about, it covers all of the different demographics. It covers the different types of housing. I think if you want to put a finer point to it, you probably could. But I don't know if you want to call it a plan.
Do you know, is there such a thing, because it's uppercase, is there such a thing as a senior housing plan?
I mean, there's nothing stopping it from being.
Okay, all right, it's not an industry standard, okay, all right.
We've
okay.
had in the town in the past, not only did we do a housing production plan, but we also did a housing plan.
Okay.
And in that housing plan, it talked about all demographics.
Okay. Okay. All right, thank you, all right. Discussion, recommendations, comments?
So given the fact that it is going to include present-day information and it is going to include an impact study, that's not asking for anything that's not going to happen. It just adds some words, but I don't have any problem in leaving those words in there. The last, in a specific senior housing plan, was once again getting to the desire to say something in the plan specific about seniors. Although I think our feeling is that basically the plan is going to talk about all groups of residents in town, and seniors will be included. Seniors aren't going to be excluded. So to be consistent with what we've talked about up in the other goals, I would just say, I'd say to include a present-day information impact analysis study, period.
Okay, anyone else have any?
I just have one comment. I do remember us going very carefully through all of our recommendations to make sure that they were very concise without any extraneous words. And so I would hate to add those back in after we went through and made sure that they were to the point.
Thank you.
I agree with Ashley, because I think that one of the things that we were focused on too was making sure that, we stated something, but then we didn't elaborate on it to then leave something out. If we're saying it needs to have these specifics, but there's another specific that it should have in it. I think it's more just kind of leaving it vague and, letting the plan be what the plan is.
Yeah, thank you, Justin.
And just to add another thought to this, as part of the housing production plan, there is a community engagement aspect that seeks input from the community on what types of housing they need. So the seniors would have a role in developing the housing production plan, as would special needs or workforce individuals.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, I just have
Amy?
a question. So you said the impact analysis would be done as part of this plan?
Yes.
Just because I know Marlboro did a housing study, and they stopped all their housing until they did a study. And they did the housing study first, and then they did their impact analysis.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering why theirs was two.
Well, the guide says that you need to look at how much your infrastructure can handle with respect to housing, additional housing.
Yep.
You can also look at it from the opposite end of the spectrum, how that housing is going to impact your existing infrastructure. So I think it's a little bit fluid and flexible in how you implement it.
I think with their housing study and fiscal impact analysis, with the fiscal impact analysis, it wasn't more on how it was it was more on like, not just like sewer and water, it was like schools and the costs and the taxes.
Mhm.
How much your taxes would go up if every single-family home in Indian Meadow went to duplexes or quadplexes. So, and how would it affect the taxes of everybody? So this would do that?
It could.
The housing, oh, it could, but it might not. It's what the town chooses to do?
Well, there are certain standards that have to be met, but, I mean, if you want to go above and beyond that to look at those fiscal impacts.
I mean, I guess that's just what would be important to me, why I'd want to leave an impact analysis study in there, because say the housing study gets done, but we don't look at the impact on the schools and the taxes. Like, a lot of things we hear from the seniors are, I don't want to move to a smaller house, I just want lower taxes to be able to afford where I live. So if we add all this new housing, and the seniors don't really want it, and it causes their taxes to go up, then we're actually affecting them negatively.
I think as part of any housing production plan, you want to do your due diligence.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you try to get it approved, there's no way, you won't get it approved if there's any sort of restrictions on new development, on new housing. So doing your due diligence and putting your ducks in a row and making sure that you're making sound decisions, I think is a prudent approach.
Approved by who?
The state.
By the
The state.
state. Okay, so in other words, if we tried to put forth a housing production plan that said we want all these extra houses and we didn't factor in how it's gonna impact different entities, they might not accept it? I mean, they actually have to accept the plan?
Well, for example, if you say you need all of this new housing, but you don't want any of the housing to exceed a certain size, then they might come back and say, well, that's not acceptable.
Okay, oh, interesting.
I mean, as Johnny was saying, there's a formula to how you do a housing production plan. Each town doesn't make it up. I mean, the state says, if you want us to approve, if you want points for a housing production plan, this is what you have to include. And then the town chooses to do it or not. So we've done it in the past, and it was approved by the state, yay us. And so if we choose to do it again, I would hope that we would follow. I mean, what's the point of doing it if you're not, going to get your credit for it, and also that it's a document that is implementable.
But
So-
to Amy's point, when you make this housing production plan, do you say, okay, and so here's the financial impact of the plan, or do you say, here's the financial realities, now let's build a housing plan that stays within that? I think that's what you're asking, right?
I'm just asking if the housing production plan automatically includes the impact that it's gonna have on taxes. Because I think what I heard him say is that all towns can pick and choose some of the items.
Maybe
Thank you.
Kathy or Jeffrey can add a few more thoughts, but the housing production plans I see focus on what the infrastructure can handle.
Right.
But the housing production guide provided by the state also provides the option to, or suggests looking at it the other way around.
Okay, Jeffrey?
So going above and beyond to look at how the production plan will impact taxes, that's going above and beyond.
That's my understanding, because I've seen, a lot of the housing production plans on the state's website, they don't always include that.
So that's why,
You're calling
oh,
a
sorry.
fiscal impact study rather than just a general impact analysis.
I don't know if I would limit it to just a fiscal, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right.
Because with your impact analysis, fiscal is one of the
Yeah.
things
Oh, I see.
that you would look at.
Jeffrey, anything else?
I don't know the specifics well enough to add more than that.
Okay, all right.
But if the goal is to do further analysis above and beyond what's in a typical housing production plan, if there's a concern for more analysis, I guess what type of analysis is it? And how could that be crafted here to be able to do that extra work above and beyond? I think that's what you're trying to figure out. What is above and beyond?
All right,
And is everything covered or not?
all right.
I think,
All right, go ahead.
sorry, if you want to provide some flexibility there, you might just want to put comma, including a robust impact analysis that looks at both sides of that spectrum. But, so, I mean, using the comma, it implies that there's other things instead of just a straight to include this, then period.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so Rick had started out making a recommendation that we recommend back that adding the additional language of including present-day information, which is redundant, but, I mean, it just, it's extra words, and an impact analysis study. Do people feel that that will satisfy
Well,
it?
I think what Donnie's suggesting is you don't say and an impact analysis, you say including an impact analysis.
Oh, okay, okay,
He said robust too, so should we?
Including.
okay.
Separate
Right,
the
okay,
thoughts, right.
all right. So do people feel that, I mean, to Ashley's point, it's a little extra words that we didn't feel necessary, but it's not really changing anything?
But if it is some, but if it does change something and it's something we want, then that's.
Okay, all right, well,
And you're getting, or the suggestion is, and you take out the specific senior housing plan.
I think that's
Yeah.
consistent with the fact that we're going to do this. This is going to happen for all the different groups in town that we need to consider. So it's not necessary to call out any one specific group.
all right, how do people feel about that? Does somebody want to take responsibility for a motion, Ashley?
Yeah, I'll move to accept the changes, right, okay, to reword H2-6 to say update the town's existing housing production plan to include present-day information, including a robust impact analysis study.
Okay, the second, anyone?
Second?
All right, Rick seconded it. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Okay, and is that in everyone? I'm sorry, yeah, okay, thank you. Okay. On the next page, Kathy was just gonna ask, there was just formatting was highlighted. None of us could actually tell what the formatting was, so that it could have just been the way it printed or not. So we're just gonna go past that. There was a couple of those that Perry gave, and it could be the Word version that people use when they open it. So, my eyesight's not good enough to see if there was actually a dot or a dash, so.
I think it was it's just
Highlighted something, but I don't see whether it's a spacing thing or a period versus a comma, so Kathy was gonna ask her.
Yeah, because in the master plan itself, it reads correctly.
Yeah.
The sentence ends, and provide amenities to residents and visitors alike, period. And then the next sentence is, this section of the master plan will review the regional and local economy of Northborough and focus on identifying economic development opportunities and strategies.
I think it's just
We couldn't
spacing.
figure out what it was.
All right, so Donnie, can you bring us up to page 5? Okay. I'm sorry, section 5-9. So we're in the economic development, and we're at the goal 1, the recommendation for goal 1. The first edit is that create a downtown planning revitalization committee made up of, it had downtown business owners, representatives, and other stakeholders. The chair is adding the word residents, as if they are not part of the stakeholders, but wanted to just ensure that everybody knows that that's what we mean by stakeholders. Does anybody have any concerns or questions about that? Okay, all right. All right, the second part of that same recommendation is, again, assist in the proposing and overseeing, what did we say?
I'm still trying to find it, my
Oh, it's
apologies.
5,
Yeah, 81-1.
it's page
Yeah.
5-9.
E
81-1.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, there it is. So it originally said the boundaries of downtown support the town's planning office, assist in proposing and overseeing plans, and, took out the word plans.
Replaced it with a downtown development plan.
Right, which would not, all right, so I think that was the discussion, if we can ask what is meant by a downtown development plan, and do we want something that specific as opposed to plans,
So,
which is more than one?
I mean, there is a downtown development plan, that's a formal document, however, in a little bit more of a context setting is, when we were developing this recommendation, there was all of these different little activities that you wanted this committee to pursue. And we truncated all of that into just plans. So I don't know if, what they're doing now is saying that this is a specific action that this committee is gonna be charged with, I guess.
Is it different than a master plan for the a downtown master plan? Is that different than a downtown development plan?
I think, yes, in the spirit of adding the word development plan versus master plan, it implies that it's focused on the development part of it versus the downtown in its entirety part of it too.
So,
So,
after I'm on America's Got Talent, I get together with the garden club and decide that we want to do a beautification thing downtown. I mean, it could be very separate plan relative to what we're doing downtown than some formal.
Right, correct.
So I like plans.
Lowercase p.
My vote is for plans.
Okay. Anybody else?
Keeping it less restrictive is a.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows what it could, yeah, well,
Okay.
this could certainly be one of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so would the recommendation be to add the word residents as to who the committee would be made of, but to leave overseeing plans so that it doesn't restrict or limit what type of plans or activities this Planning and Revitalization Committee could take on?
I'm back. I make a motion
All
that
right.
we accept that,
All
as
right.
stated by Fran.
All right, and Jason is seconding it. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? All right, that's everyone, thank you. Down to goal number 2. All right, so in this one here, okay, adding to evaluating the need for the ability to sustain a dedicated economic development staff and a committee. They're at a committee. The reality is we're talking about evaluating the need for, so adding a committee as to something that we may evaluate the need for doesn't seem to be any more or less of an impact than what we said. So it's just adding something specific that we just want to highlight.
Yeah, and I think the reasoning behind it, what Carrie said was, like, there's a lot of times where we said, we're not going to be able to afford the economic development staff person, even though we want it. I think a couple times in our meetings, we said, we're never going to get the money for it. So if we can't, maybe we should at least do an economic development committee. I think Westboro has an active one, and hopefully we'll get a staff member. But if we don't, maybe we can get a committee.
Right,
Or have both.
Right, and at the end it says, and development efforts through the comprehensive economic development plan. Remembering the key first 4 words of this recommendation is evaluate the need for. So we're not saying we have to have one, that we're going to have one, or what its charge is. We're going to evaluate the need for.
Would you also put and or if you said it was, if you couldn't afford it, you would have
Yeah,
somebody instead?
I think
So
so.
it wouldn't be just and, it would be and or.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I wouldn't make it, well, so here's what's interesting. I wouldn't make it an exclusionary. I mean, just thinking about this from an implementation point of view. So if we develop this implementation committee, right? I'm just reflecting on, I'm trying to think what the top 3 priorities of the town were. Oh, yeah, downtown, downtown, downtown. So it's not crazy that that implementation committee would like, potentially, I'm not saying it has to happen, but have a separate committee that's focused on downtown, because there's a lot there that needs to be addressed. And the implementation committee needs to consider a lot of other things under this plan.
Okay, all right, so does anybody feel any real concerns or reservations about the additional words that are being recommended?
And we're gonna put a slash or after the and.
People would recommend the and or? Okay, all right, we will recommend that it's an and or. Somebody want to make a motion?
I move that we leave EG1 as proposed, the changes as proposed, but adding slash or after and on the first line.
Okay,
Second.
all those in favor? That's everyone. Okay, so the next one, the ED22, I'm gonna ask Kathy to speak a little bit, and then certainly Jeffrey, Donnie, Mark. Consider engaging, where was it?
Yeah,
A
regional.
real estate advisory firm is being replaced with a regional planning agency. And my understanding, those are 2 very different things with their own bells, whistles, and limitations, and why we may or may not want to either do an and/or or one or the other. So I'll let somebody who knows more about it speak to it.
I'll just, I'll tell you right off the bat that they're not interchangeable. I mean, there are real estate firms, I mean, everyone thinks real estate, you know, as in selling houses or properties. I mean, there's real estate advisory firms that do this technical research, and there's one on board as part of this master plan. They're one of the sub-consultants that have worked with VHB. it's not interchangeable with a regional planning commission. I mean, regional planning commission, every regional planning commission in Massachusetts is different than the other. There's an agency that, you know, represents the Boston communities that acts much like a private consulting firm. Our regional planning commission is very good on, we're working with one of the staff members right now on working on some bylaws. They're very good with demographics. They're very good with research. They're very good with assisting communities that don't have staff. You know, the majority of the communities that our regional planning commission represents don't have professional staff. A lot of the town halls aren't even open 5 days a week. So they're not interchangeable, and so I would, my recommendation to all of you would be not to delete real estate advisory firm and not replace it with regional planning agency.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, Donnie or Jeffrey?
No, just that we've seen through our careers that there is a difference there, and not that one's better or different or worse, but it's just the skills that I think would be needed to do that type of redevelopment strategy. They specialize in doing that type of work, to the point that we've seen some of these firms that might have a national resume, that might do entire cities of doing these types of plans too, and just knowing how important that redevelopment strategy is for your downtown and for your community, and getting into the weeds intentionally, you probably need someone that specializes in that. That stuck out to us as well.
Okay, all right. Anyone else know anything about?
I just want to put a little context, because we talked about the planning board meeting, and at the time, we didn't know what a regional planning advisory firm would do, and that was just last week. So now we're getting more information this week. But I think Carrie's point was, she works a lot with CMRPC, and they saw a lot of the things that they said, we can help you with this. Because a lot of these studies that were added to this master plan cost a lot of money, whether it's the downtown visualization, all that stuff. So she thought we could put regional planning agency, just to save the town some money if they could do it. So maybe do an and/or, because a lot of these things could possibly be done by them.
And would it be the regional planning agency? Because it's not, we don't have a choice. We can only work with CMRPC.
Right.
Okay.
But I still, like, again, talking context, the planning board just worked on one new bylaw, which was really taking a bylaw from 2014 and updating it, and then adding some language throughout our bylaw for hazardous facilities. Those two bylaws took the entire amount of time that we have with our regional planning commission and then some. So we're done. It's January and we're done. We still have all the way to June. So there's no way you're gonna get that kind of detailed study. It's just not, they just don't have the capacity to do it with everything else that we ask them to help us with in the town.
Okay, so, I mean, if leaving the real estate advisory firm, which is really a specialty entity that you can pick and choose from hundreds of them across the country, depending on what you're looking for, is different than us just calling CMRPC and saying, hey, do you know anything about this or that? And they would still help us, or
Absolutely.
right, they
Right.
don't have to be targeted in
Right.
in this.
They would, like, what I would do, what I would do, say, on this particular one, is I would call them and say, hey, what do you know about redevelopment plans? What towns have worked on them? And they would go and do the research. They would call all their, communities, look through their libraries, look online, do the Google searches, and they would find that information for us. They would help us decipher some of it.
Okay.
But and if people are I don't know if people are or not, but I mean, if people don't like the term, real estate advisory firms, right, I mean, we could just leave it as, firm or consulting firm or just or if that's the big hang up, and I don't know if it is, but, just creating a redevelopment strategy for the town's business districts.
Okay, all right,
And then, that, then, right.
okay, all right, so those can be a recommendation. How do other people feel about making that type of recommendation back to the planning board? Explaining what the differences are, why it's being explained to us as to why they are, how they are different and why it matters. How do people
I think we
feel?
could do that, but I think just adding the words "and/or real estate advisory firm" after regional planning agency satisfies all of the needs.
As long as it was the regional planning agency, because it's not A, it's the.
I mean, you should just spell it out. It's
Yeah.
Central Mass Regional Planning
So we
Commission.
could just replace.
And/or real estate advisory firm. Okay, how do people feel about that, addressing this issue?
Good.
Mark?
My takeaway was that this as an implementation tool wasn't basically to do kind of the higher overarching work that you would expect from a regional planning commission. It was more to try to bring it into closer to a tactical also, as to what can happen. If you're looking for that end product and you hire a regional planning commission, you will end up being disappointed. You will not get what you want. So when you say and/or, it depends on what you're trying to get to. If what you're trying to do is just do another study, in general terms, but it's not gonna bring some of the tactical pieces that a good advisory firm can bring to you as to how you can actually in the world reuse the land as opposed to how you can do it by playing a simulation.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
As Cassie mentioned, we could, on a project, start with CMR, whatever they call themselves, Central Mass Regional Planning Commission, to get some overall information as to what's been going on around us.
Right.
And then engage a real estate advisory firm to do the actual work.
Right, but I
And you
mean,
do that
but that's an
anyway.
everyday,
Yeah.
I do that all the
happens.
time.
Right.
You don't need that in a master plan,
Okay.
my humble opinion.
Okay,
It doesn't, I mean, it's just, it's what we do. It's what it's towns use their regional planning commissions.
all
It's
right,
an initial
okay.
step, and then from the information you get from that, you move on to the more.
Yeah, then you get into the specifics of it,
Which would probably lead us to a professional real estate advisory firm to do the nuts and bolts details of the redevelopment strategy specific for the town.
Is there any value though, Kathy, so for the resident of town that has insomnia and picks this up, right, to read, is there at least an educational value to it? I mean, there's a lot of things that I've learned from being on this committee, to at least state that, that they're one of the options, they're the and/or in this process. And to your point, you'd likely engage them. So is there really any harm saying them and/or a real estate advisory firm? I mean, and again, I don't know, maybe there's no
Right.
educational value to
I
putting
don't,
it.
I think it all goes back to what Mark was saying, that if you're trying to achieve a certain result, and the real estate advisory firm is the only person that, or the group.
Is gonna be able to do it for you?
that can get there, and that's exactly what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I kind of buy in with Rick's thing though, and Kathy's comment even, like, you're gonna call them and check out who else has done it. And I'd want to look at other people's plans to figure out, like, well, how do I want to lead this consultant, right? Like, I don't want you spending your hours and time on this. I already know I want to do that from looking at these other plans. So,
All right,
so to me,
okay.
it's,
if you want to use, if you want to use I mean, again, it's done all the time, but,
Right.
I mean, whether it's this town or any other town. But if you're gonna make a reference here, then it belongs everywhere. It belongs throughout your master plan. So it's just inherent that we use our regional planning commissions.
Okay. All right, so just to keep us moving, I mean,
Yeah.
all right, so,
Just-
okay, one sec, Susan wants to make a
I was gonna
motion.
make a motion that we just reject what the proposed language of regional planning agency and leave it as is with real estate advisory firm with the explanation of the differences between the two
Right,
entities.
and let her
And
decide.
that we are, and still, the whole point of this is considering engaging
Yeah.
in. You're gonna pick who you're gonna do. We're diving deep into an information conversation where we're supposed to be planning, not implementing. That's the next committee. So
There you go.
that's my proposal.
All right, so Susan has made a recommendation to reject the change with explanation. Do I hear a second?
Gladly second.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, all those in favor? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, okay, so it
Yep.
passes. I don't know who voted against it.
I just voted to abstain. I'll wait till the planning board. Just because we're going to talk about it again.
as I said. All right, so moving on to the next page, now we're into public facilities, and we're back in key findings. And in this, and again, now, we're not, to Kathy's point, we're not gonna rewrite, we're not going to add. There's just a comment being made that, and I actually don't even understand what the point, what is being asked, but concern that there's not language in here regarding,
Is this in the lead-in paragraph? Just previously.
The first, where it says formatted highlight, but not, we can't see it.
No effective
Right.
capital planning.
Yeah, that, again, I think it's,
I don't think it's,
I think maybe how it printed for her or something.
I don't think it's.
Right.
I can't hear, I'm sorry.
I agree that the reference to the formatting in the paragraph, I don't think that there's really anything there that's.
Right, okay, no, I'm going right to the commented, where I don't see this clearly reflected as a recommendation in the law defining the master plan, the following is noted. Now, if it's part of the law, but you're not finding in the recommendation, it doesn't matter if it's part of the law, but I don't know exactly what she is referencing that is not
I think she's
included.
referencing that the law states that you should include something addressing this in your master plan.
Okay.
Some statement about it,
Okay,
is the way I'm interpreting her comment.
well, then I mean, if that's the case, if the planning board finds a place to put it, I guess they can put it someplace. I mean, I did have the copy of the law with me, but I left stuff home.
Well, there's no suggested wording, so there's nothing you can comment.
Right, so it's just a comment.
I mean, and just in general for everybody, I mean, I know we want to move along, but, you know, this is what our DPW director does, you know, on a daily basis. What's in this comment box, so,
All right, so
just so
again,
people know that it's covered.
right, so to Rick's point, it's just a comment, it's not making any changes, so we'll just move on. Okay, on page 7-12, we have goal number 1, recommendation number 4. The original one just said, include future growth projections into updating existing town plans. There's extra language wanting to drill down a little bit on what we mean by that. To Ashley's point, in the past, we specifically didn't drill down to that level to make sure that we didn't miss anything that might be included. So I don't know if people feel the same way about that at this point. CIP is capital improvement project, plan, sorry, capital improvement plan, which is the 5-year capital improvement plan that we have.
Capital improvement plan, right, it's kind of a 5-year look ahead, but in addition to that, we also sort of have placeholders in mind for large-scale capital building projects. So for example, as you might guess, Peasley Elementary School and Malvern Middle School are somewhere out on that horizon, not within 5 years probably, but somewhere along there. And it's kind of a collaborative thing between school administration, school committee, and the town administration and finance committees to be aware that these things are out there. We do have a hiring slot for a dedicated facilities manager that was approved at town meeting last year. That slot has not yet been filled, but presumably that person would be responsible for being on top of the many details that go along with that for the entirety of the town's capital infrastructure.
All right, so does anyone feel the need to add language to the end, or is it implied that including future growth projections into updates of existing plans would, of course, be part of the, or the capital improvement plan would be part of it, or vice versa? Just to keep us moving
I
along.
don't have any heartburn with that either.
I guess just a question for the consultants, whether that, like, should that be stated somewhere? I mean, PFS 1-4 kind of gets at it. Also, the next goal, 1-5, PFS 1-5 kind of gets at, you know, the capital improvement planning process. repurposing, reusing old existing buildings.
Well, the next one does too, it talks about capital
That's what I
assets,
mean,
yeah.
So it's, I mean, it's talked about in 3 different places, do we need to state specifically anything about capital improvement?
I think the language that's added to PFS 1.4 is what we've been doing for the last 15, 20 years. in a
Okay.
Pretty,
Okay,
uh,
all right,
pretty attentive way.
all right, thank
Okay.
you. All
And
right,
I
so.
think that's what Kathy was saying. 'cause
Is there a
it's really
motion?
getting-
All right.
Is there a motion somewhere in here?
Is there a motion? Is there a motion in there somewhere?
Uh,
Somebody want a motion to either accept or reject the recommended additional language?
I'll move to recommend leaving PFS 1-4 unmodified.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor? All right, so Amy is abstaining again. Okay, thank you, Michelle. Okay. All right, the next one is, again, adding language, expand and continue to improve the timeliness of content and ease of use of the website, and to expand the ease and access of information. Again, it's just, I mean, we maybe got worded out, and Kerry had a little bit more energy looking at this, but it's just adding more words. It's not changing unless somebody feels it changes the intent. And if not, what do people think?
It adds social media.
I think I would probably want to leave it as is, because this is such a social media, as media changes and everything changes all the time with tech, I would not want to leave, so.
How do you feel about and ease of use being added, though?
Well, we already have that in our original
It was
enhanced
deleted.
ease of use.
Oh, that was, she was deleting that. Oh, sorry.
We had that in the end, just blew it out.
Okay, so Susan's recommending that we leave, that the recommendation is we leave as written.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? All right, we're gonna leave it as is. Oh, we're gonna recommend that you leave it as is. All right, the next one is in goal 2, consider improving and modernizing. Instead of consider improve, so instead of just improving, we're modernizing. I guess because sometimes improving, I don't know.
Yeah, you could just be updating the string between the two cans, you know what I mean?
Yeah. To accommodate new technologies and updated platforms for communication, and instead of saying as needed. All right, do people have any concerns?
Yeah, I think this, and modernizing is superfluous. I don't think it needs to be added, personally.
Okay, all right.
Well, it's kind of one or the other, it's either the and modernizing or to accommodate new technologies.
Well, it was originally, consider improving the town-wide communication network over time as needed.
Yeah, personally, I think that's sufficient.
All right. John thinks it's sufficient. Does anybody else feel any which way?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so John made a motion to recommend leaving as is.
Yes, I did.
Susan recommended, seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? That would be everyone again, except for Amy.
I just want to hear what Kerry says when I go back to the planning board. So if I
Yeah,
like,
but you're on this committee
I know
right
I'm on
now.
both, I'm wearing
Come
two
on.
hats. It makes it
Right, so
great.
you actually,
Come on
I
board.
have two hats.
you actually can disagree with the chair of your committee.
Oh, I know,
Okay,
but if I
sure.
vote here, then I don't leave it open
So I
for
think the
discussion
point
there.
that we started the discussion, the very beginning, when we started the first edit, was how much do we want to get into like all the added stuff
Oh, I know.
onto it? When it's just
understand.
supposed to be very general,
I
right?
understand.
It's very high level, very high level.
Right,
And if you're looking at it from a planning board, you're looking more into detail.
right.
And there's a
I know.
gap between the planning board and the master plan, it's called the implementation.
Right.
And that's more the detail.
I
And
understand.
the reality is, yes, I mean, you could wear both hats, you're
Yeah.
choosing not to, that's fine. Goal 4, again, I think this is adding language to et cetera, right? You have to, could you scroll down for us? Sorry. Okay, so 4.1, we said, in conjunction with the school department, in line with the public facilities, blah, 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 other sources, et cetera. And now this is to clarify why we're saying it, so she's recommending that we explain why we're doing this analysis.
So I'll speak to this one because this is the one I kind of worked on. I think the overarching goal of this particular recommendation was to just make sure that you're servicing your public buildings and school department is meeting your needs. And to do that, that's kind of what that is, just to analyze what you have in your population that you need to serve. I think what the goal of that was. So I don't know if that's what she means by didn't ensure they're properly sized. It's kind of redundant because you're going to get that in the study. I don't think that's needed. If she really wants to add that is to the end of knowing whether or not you're going to be in the queue of the Massachusetts School Building Authority to qualify for partial reimbursement. We kind of look at that anyway. I mean, the school committee, we're not going to go forward with a capital plan. We're going to try to maximize our resources when we go out for a capital plan for the school. So that wasn't necessarily the intention of that particular recommendation. It could be in there, but that wasn't the intention.
Okay, Jason?
These additional, this additional text seems very focused on the school buildings, their sizes, and whether or not we're maintaining them, and whether or not we're pursuing whatever we need through Mass School Building Authority. But the goal itself is just continue to support an excellent educational system. And I think the data that this particular recommendation was looking to get drives a number of decisions apart from just the physical buildings.
Right.
So from that standpoint, and also from the fact that Susan said, we aren't going to build a school without getting assistance from Mass School Building Authority.
And we would do it without knowing our enrollment numbers and our data either. You'd want to study that and know what
You have to have all
population
that
is. So
information. It's
Exactly.
compelled to produce
So it's
all
a
that
little
information in order to submit an application. I also want to say too that the notion that we have to hurry up and get in line so we don't miss out on money is just misguided. That's not the way the process works anymore. It's the way it used to work in the past before they revised the entire state program back in the mid-2000s. Now it's based on a more methodical evaluation or even probably distribution of assistance across all the communities. We've just built Lincoln Street School. You know, conceptually, we're a little bit back in the queue now.
There you go, all right.
So I don't think there's, I don't think that level of detail here is really all.
All right.
I'm
Mark?
sensing a
Motion to
motion.
reject.
There you go.
Okay.
Second.
All right, there's a motion to reject the recommendation. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, there we have it. All right, so now we're on to the other planning board members' changes and questions. So Amy did not format it the same way Kerry did, so we're just going to go back to page 2-3 in land use. Because Amy had, and Amy, then we're just going to give you, to explain though, what it is that you're asking for, and then I will say, if we can, just to cut to the chase on one of them, Donnie did put together an additional a table?
Yeah, I mean, we
Okay.
can explain it when it comes.
Okay, all right, to add to one of the concerns that you had, and hopefully that will resolve some of the other issues. But if you want to just give a brief overview of what you're asking for, and then I'm going to let Donnie explain the rationale behind some of it.
Okay, I just want to start with my main concerns was being on the planning board or even a resident. When I opened the land use chapter, it was very confusing. And I just wanted a couple more tables that brought it up to date, or at least laid out. The first table I have, I'll explain it that way.
And do you know, can you like point to pages or?
Well, the tables aren't in the page, so
Oh,
I'm
okay.
asking for them.
Okay.
So, but if you go to my document where it says AP edits, the very first table was an inventory of land use, and it was from the 1997 master plan.
This one?
Yep, this one.
So this
It's the second
it's
to last
in the very
page.
back.
Yeah.
Second to last page. Okay, so this was in 1997.
Yep, and I attached it as an example because when I read through the land use chapter, it was confusing. I couldn't open it up and see how much industrial land do we have, how much is developed, how much is left to develop. I had to read through the chapters, try to map out my own chart, and on page 2-5, I think, it said we had, or the chart is up there. It says, oh no, next one. It's 2-2, the chart. Page 2-.
Okay, sorry, table 2-2?
Yeah, table 2-2.
Which is on page 2-5.
Yep.
Oh, there it is.
So if you go down, actually to the next page where it says industrial, it says there's 480 acres of industrial land. But then when I go to page 2-11, it says we have 1,800 acres of industrial land. So I couldn't figure out how much industrial land do we have.
All right, so I'm gonna let Donnie,
Yeah, so to that point, the 1,800 acres is just the boundaries of the zone. So the industrial zone, that's just that. So there's underlying uses within that zone, and not every use conforms to the zone. So it's just inherently gonna be less than the boundary itself.
right, which, as an example,
So
that's
some of it could
Avalon
be
Bay,
wetlands
no,
within the
Avalon
zone,
Bay
it could be-
and Northborough Crossing are in
Yeah.
our industrial zoned land, but they're commercial and residential overlay usage. So it's, the land is being used, but not for industrial.
Well, what I
That's the
found
best
that was
example.
super easy was that chart from the original master plan. It's a inventory of land use. And you open it up, it tells you, this is how many acres we actually have of industrial land. This is how much is developed. This is how much is left to be developed. And this is how much is undevelopable.
Okay.
And I just thought, yeah, as a planner or a planning board, that was important information that I couldn't find.
Right, so,
So, yeah, okay, so yes, so this table here is essentially just collapsing what you're providing here.
Yep.
Instead of giving you all of the land use codes by that, the 400 bracket, it's just consolidating everything within that bracket.
Yeah, I guess I would just suggest, again, I remember we had this discussion, right? It's sort of, this plan is meant to operate at a higher level, right? So the detail underneath this data that you need to get in a particular board or during the implementation committee needs to access, it's available. And I guess I get concerned about trying to make the document be the source of all information.
I mean, it's available, but it's buried in the assessor's data. So. what
Right,
I-
but isn't that,
right,
Okay.
so here's what, is this what you're recommending?
Well, this is what I pulled together based on the comment, because we do
committee
have.
needs it.
We do have the breakdown,
That's very helpful.
a bit not within table format, but we do have a breakdown of what vacancy is within each of the different sort of high-level land uses. So what's developable, what's potentially developable within commercial, residential, and industrial. So what I ended up doing here is just breaking it out into a table format to show you what residential land is the developable versus potentially versus undevelopable, and what that percent of the total, not total land area within the town is, not necessarily within its own sort of,
Right.
how much, vacant is within the commercial areas, that's classic, but total. So, for example, developable residential land is, 1.76% of all land within the town. So I thought, this column here was the column that was missing. This column is in the document, but it's buried in a narrative. So I don't know if this helps or meets your intent, but ultimately, I thought this kind of
Okay.
gets at what was
All right.
being asked.
So Amy, what I will do is we'll have Donnie send that to you. If
Okay.
it's what you're looking for, when you get to the planning board on the 18th, you can say this is something that you are or are not interested
Sure.
in adding.
Sure, thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
One thing that I thought was a good point that Amy made was, why did we stop at 2005? I'm pretty sure the land use cover data goes beyond 2005 at this point.
Yeah, so at the time it did not. So it was just updated
Oh,
within
so
recent
just-
months to 2016.
Okay.
So at the time it was just 85, 79, 85, 99, and 05. So we utilize that data. The 2016 data is not compatible with the old data in terms of categories. So it would be a bit of an effort to go back and mark that trend. But again, the land cover / use data from GIS is really an indicator of trend over time. For example, what naturally developed lands have been converted to developed lands, how much agricultural have we lost? It's not necessarily precise because the foundation of it really is an aerial imagery. And it's also not parcel-based. So it's very much land cover-based. What's the use on the ground from a natural perspective? Is it natural or is it unnatural, human
And what
activity?
is really it's giving you trends, but is it really useful data? That was sort of my perspective, I know how it's derived at,
yeah.
how does this?
It's to give you that key finding of, where you've been since the last master plan. Where have you been preceding that date of the master plan, and what is your trajectory, basically? Have you been trending more toward residential development, low bit residential, development, or more toward industrial, or more toward commercial, or how has that composition changed over time? It's really not.
It is concerning though, like, if there isn't data from the last 15 years and we're trying to find trends, things have changed a lot.
But the reality is we have access to that data in the next few months, that it's not that it's going to be precluded from any decision process. It's just not going to be in this, it's like the census. I mean, we're using 10-year-old data now, and we're going to use it for another 2 years. And it's not reflective of what's happening right now, but it's what the industry uses. But again, I mean, the data will be there for the planning board or the zoning board or the economic development, to use, the implementation to use in the process. It's just at some point you have to put pen to paper, right? And so you use what the industry determines is the most recent data. If we wait another couple of months, then we'll have it, but I mean, we're done in December, so. All right, so Amy, if that answers one of your big questions, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I just
so-
want to ask about, you were just saying in a couple months we'll have that data. I
I
thought
don't
you
know
just
that
said
for
it's
sure.
not compatible.
Well, it's
Didn't
not
you just say-
compatible with this document, right?
No, it's not compatible with the,
Historically, the way it was formatted.
so it's never going to be
No,
compatible.
I'm just, right, I just made up the few months, I mean, just because it's new data. When she's saying it's not compatible, it just means that it's not gonna fit in the same chart. They're
Yeah.
measuring it in a different way?
Well, they're the categories. I mean, the
Okay.
categories change over time, and they get consolidated, and they just,
Do you have an example? Do you know one? I mean, like, are they not saying agriculture, or they're not saying residential or commercial? Or?
for example, I think that, how, there's various types of wetlands, and sometimes the wetlands are, broken out. And like, if you go back into 1979, there's many more categories than there are now for land use. So I think, don't take my word for it, but for example, like, that could be one potential,
Okay.
opportunity for consolidation where, and it gets more complicated with residential and industrial.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so when it becomes available, it's something that our boards, committees, and commissions could use as an additional tool in addition to this master plan?
Yes.
Okay.
It is
There you go.
another tool.
All right.
I have another question.
And it is, and it's just one tool.
Yes.
It's not the be-all and the end-all.
All right, okay.
I mean,
Okay, go ahead, Amy.
My other question was, I added a second table to the document everybody has. And if land cover was 1985 to 2005, which is old,
Are you talking about the last page?
I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So what I did for this chart was, all I took was the 1997 master plan, and I used their data, and I compared it to the data that the consultants put in the new master plan, and I got the real change versus 1985 to 2005 land cover. This was actual. So it shows our agricultural dropped by 62%, our commercial went up by 100%. So these are the real numbers. Like, I was just wondering why we can't use this table versus, this is from the assessors.
Right, all right,
Like-
so I just want, all right, so
Well,
one
wait,
second.
no, let- keep
No,
talking,
no,
keep going.
Well, they just sidebarred for a second, so I just wanted to make sure that they heard that this is
Yep.
off of the assessor's data.
Yeah.
Okay,
The second
sorry,
part of the
sorry.
data was
Sorry.
from them. It was from the plan that we have in our hands. And the first part of the data was assessor data that I pulled right out of the old master plan. So I just took the data from the master plan where we left off, and I used the data that the consultants added this, I think it's table 2.2 again. and it got the percentage change. So I was wondering why we couldn't use this table versus using the old 1985 to 2005 land cover, which may not ever be able to be updated easily.
So our 2.2 does say that it's 2017.
Right, I think she's saying that she pulled.
That's the
that.
second part of the, I
Oh,
pulled off the first part of the chart out of the old master plan where it says 1996 acre. I don't know what per zone is, that doesn't need to be in there. But see where it says 1996 acres? That was from the old master plan. I have a copy. I just went and took their numbers. I compared them to the numbers that the consultants
Okay,
had,
okay.
and it showed the change.
right.
So this is the real change. So instead of saying our commercial was falling between 1985 and 2005, you could say, well, our commercial was actually rising 100% between 1996 and 2016 or 2017. Like, I felt it was real data that we could use.
That's what was my question to Donna.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I don't think this is comparing the same thing.
The only thing that would change is the transportation, because the
No,
transportation is pulled out now.
I think he's comparing, I think one is comparing land uses,
I had page
No.
37 of the old
And-
master plan.
and isn't the other one comparing land?
No, I think,
one thing,
I think it's all, yeah, I
Right.
think it's all assessors data. I think the question that Jeffrey had was whether or not the codes were the same in 96. They shouldn't be off all that much.
No, they're the same. I actually did an update
Okay. well
using
then-
all the codes.
Yeah, so we would just have to verify it, and
Yeah, I just thought
That-
they
that-
verified
That
it.
goes back to my point, you know, does the land cover data tell us all that much? It's nice to have and sort of look back on as we're moving forward into the future, but maybe this gets at more what we'd like to see. You know, this really tells the story a little bit better than the land cover data.
I think Kathy made the point that these are different ways of looking at who you are as a community, right? So an assessor, you might be assessed a certain way, but how something, or zoned a certain way, or land coverage that might be a certain way. And sometimes those data are up to date, sometimes they're a little bit out of date. These are just different indicators about what's out there. And sometimes we find that there's inconsistencies within the same assessor's data in terms of being up to date or not as well, and how it's coded, just like with land use codes and so forth. So think about it as different ways of looking at what you've got, right?
right, but, so, I mean, just when looking at the first one, agriculture in 1996 was 9.8% total acres of something. We're now saying in 2017, it's only 3.6% total acres of something. And that's a 62% decrease in agricultural total acres, either use or vacancies or something,
development.
right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
how it's comparing. We're just not sure of what, but, I mean, I don't
But
know.
why-
Well, I guess the reality is, you know, if this is something that should be added to the document, is this, I mean, Ashley makes the point that some of these tables are really just, you know, big picture reference points. Others are looking at them more as a more detailed tool. I don't know that we're gonna be, I don't know that our responsibility right now is to figure it out. I don't know.
I just want to ask Donnie and them to check the numbers. I mean, as a member of the planning board, these numbers have more, like they give us more of an idea than looking back at 1985 to 2005.
Unless you're just playing the devil's advocate, what difference does it make if
Yeah.
the project is in front of you at this moment on a piece of land that it is zoned properly for, whether or not it's going to impact the percentage of agricultural land we have still available? I'm
One
not
of our
sure.
first land use goals are to weigh the difference between whether we want open space or we want to develop it. And you might look at this and say, wow, we've lost a lot of agricultural space. Maybe we should save some of that. I don't know. I just thought it was more up to date. I just don't know what the 1985 to 2005 is really giving us.
Yeah, it's-
And that's why they're kind of indicators. I don't think one's right or wrong. It's just different ways of looking at it.
I mean, internally, you know, sometimes I think people dismiss data if they don't understand it, that it's not significant. Like, we use Mass GIS all the time, in-house, all the time. So to say that it doesn't have a place in the master plan, just because they do it in 15-year increments, You know, I mean, again, that, we use that myself, the town engineer, the conservation agent. It's what we, you know, it's one of our tools.
So do you think
It's
we'll
used
update
all
the
time.
master plan with the new data? The 2016 data?
I mean, I guess that's up to the boards, but we didn't in 1997.
Right.
You know, you wait for the, you know it's a plan that's eventually going to be updated. You know, I mean, we have access to the data, you know, today. You know, I mean, we go on Mass GIS. So, but again, those are the details that we work with. You know, they're not necessarily, should be in a master plan.
All right, so, I mean, just to keep us moving, this is being recommended by a planning board member to be added to the master plan. As the steering committee, you can either agree that it's something that should be added, something, or is because, or no because.
So,
Mark?
I think the question is maybe a little bit different, Madam Chair. It seems to me that there needs to be some consistent integrity in the document. And if every chart and every piece of data has been prepared and brought forward through the work of the consultants, I think if you start adding other work by others to that, you're affecting the integrity of the document. So if the will of this board or this group, without maybe the ability financially to do it, is they want to revisit and hire these folks to prepare new charts, that's one thing. But the concept that planning board members are going to start to add charts to a report that has all of our names on it becomes very troubling.
Yeah, I would agree that, I
Nothing
think,
wrong with babies. Even though they have to go to school sometimes.
I understand that there are many different ways to look at the data. And I understand that the way members of the planning board may want to look at the data may not be exactly the way the data is represented in the plan. And to that extent, it's possible for members of the planning board to get other charts and other data that are useful to them for their purposes. But I agree that the plan that was developed and that we approved reflected the data in a certain way for a certain purpose, and it reflected it as a point in time. And that the recommendations that have flowed from the plan in Chapter 9 really aren't overly connected to the different baseline sections of the report. The baseline sections of the report provided one purpose. The recommendations really were kind of our joint work to say, what are the things we think the town ought to be considering, and in what order, and how should they be done? And so I don't see any of this information affecting the actual recommendations, which I think is that Chapter 9 is, I think, the key output of the plan to the town. So my recommendation would be, I agree with Mark, that we ought to leave the baseline sections of the plan the way they are, and to the extent that these kinds of tables and charts are useful to the planning board and they can be developed and provided to the planning board for their use, that should continue to happen, but not as a part of the master plan, because it was never the goal of the master plan to become an ongoing updated working document for planning board decision-making. It was meant to show a point in time of how the town looked and a series of recommendations as to what the town ought to consider going forward. And so I don't disagree with some of the charts that Amy's provided here tonight being useful to the planning board. I just don't think that they should be added or the plan should be changed to change its focus, because even if we did, that baseline section will then become out of date fairly quickly, and to go in and continue to modify the master plan as a working decision-making document for different boards in town was never the intent. So I would advise against making these changes, not because I don't think they're meaningful and not because I don't think they're helpful. It's only that they're not really part of why the plan was done.
Okay, thank you.
So that'd be my
Okay.
input.
Was that like a second to Mark's motion, or?
Did
Sorry.
he motion?
No. Oh, what are other people's thoughts?
I mean, Amy, do you understand where I'm coming from?
I do, but I was just gonna ask you, what about the one chart that they already made that lays out what is written in the text? Like, he took, to get that, you have to read through the narrative and put together your own chart, so they,
Well, so Donnie has put one together for you
right.
to
Well, that's
look
why I'm
at.
wondering if Rick was
He's
saying no to both of them, or just one of them?
I guess I'm disagreeing with including the two charts that you included in your recommended changes. I really didn't consider what Donnie had produced. If in fact what Donnie has produced is consistent with the integrity of the plan and would be helpful, I guess I don't have a problem with including that plan, but I guess I'd like you maybe to speak a little bit more to the thing that you developed, Donnie,
Oh, sure.
and how that fits into the plan we have, and does that in any way affect any of the integrity of what we've already done?
Well, no, it's really just a summary of the existing data. Like I mentioned, the only new piece of information is how this is sort of placed into the context of the overall land acreage of the town. So, for example, what percent of the land is potentially developable or developable from a residential standpoint?
And that's specifically what zoning, that's the zoned land, right? Because we can develop commercial, we can do commercial development in our industrial. We can do commercial development in our residential with special permits and variances. So what is this actually?
Well, this is based on the land use code that's within the assessor's data, and this is consistent with the build-out analysis. It's consistent with the presentation of the vacancies. It's just a summary, it's just a summary of what's already there, so it wouldn't change.
All right.
It doesn't change it just makes it more useful.
Okay, so it's consistent with what's in the narrative, and it's being provided by the consultants.
I guess I would move then that the only change we make to the baseline for land use is to include in the appropriate place this new chart that Donnie's developed.
Okay. All right, that would be the recommendation to the planning board. There was a motion and a second by Mark. Any further discussion? All those in favor? All right. Not even going to vote on your own?
Well, yeah, I want to include that, but I also want to just look over everything. I don't want to be,
Well, that was the, so the baseline in total, or, I'm not sure what you mean by everything.
I just want to review it all. I'm just abstaining for now. I do want to add the chart that Donnie added. I'm just going to look at it first.
All right, are there any other things that were not addressed when we went through housing with Kerry's that you feel you still need to?
Well, my comments on housing was just on the order, because we just got into a big discussion about the housing production plan. So that was short-term, which I guess it sounds like it should come first.
Okay, you're talking about your
I'm on my,
on the implementation.
Implementation, yep.
Okay.
And I'm on the last page before the charts. I didn't
Okay.
number my pages.
Okay.
But the top of it says H2-6.
Okay, got it.
And this is when, before we had the discussion tonight,
Okay.
we talked a lot about the housing production plan. And in my mind, I felt the housing production plan needs to come first, just to see what the town needs, what the impact would be on the town. And it was short-term, which I thought was a good idea. No changes there. I'm just trying to, and then H3-1, it talks about capacity of what we need to support the additional housing. And that was midterm. So my question was, should H2-1, which is Rick's house price point study, I thought maybe that should be midterm to long-term, because I thought you couldn't do such a study until you did the first two. That was my only concern, is with house price points being short-term, is the cart coming before the horse?
All right, so I would suggest, since the planning board still will have to vote on whether or not they agree with our recommendations on Kerry's language, or whether, so if the planning board's going with Kerry's language, that might make your request different.
Right.
Than if the planning, so the planning board's gonna have to look at her recommendations on those recommendations.
Right.
Before they can answer that question, right?
Right. I guess I just want to ask the consultants a quick question while they're here.
Right.
Is, do you feel like the house price points, that's like, I don't know how to say it. That's something that's like current. It's like when you do the house price points in 2020, those are the house price points in 2020. So should it come after the other studies? Because if you do that first, and then you do the impact studies and the housing studies, then is that data out of date? I was just wondering if you thought something as specific as a housing price point study should come after the other two studies. Like, do you think the house, if you had to put an order, if all these plans couldn't be done at once, would you do the housing production plan first, along with the impact study, and then do a house price points? That's what I'm wondering.
Well, I'm just trying to think of what we just talked about in terms of separating the intent of that first
I
one
know.
versus the last one. And the intent of the first one of the H3-1, is that the right one, Don?
That's one of the studies she's referring to.
Right.
No.
Looking-
But we're
2-1
talking
is-
about,
H2-1, up
yeah,
higher.
we're talking about the
Go
production
higher.
plan and then also the price point.
The price, so the
analysis.
price
Price
point
points.
one, I think we're concluded before, that was intended to be a broader study about understanding how you provide housing for those different price
Right.
points that might not be in the housing production plan.
Right,
So I think by the fact of the committee thinking that these are separate pieces, they could probably be thought about separately. However, tying the production plan to the implementation, the the housing production plan to the implementation and the infrastructure part of it, those two should be closely aligned, I would imagine.
right, but one's midterm, one's short-term, right?
Well, the production plan is short-term,
And the
the
price point is
is
short-term.
short-term.
But H3-1 is midterm.
I mean, my thoughts are, you may, as part of the whole housing, portion of the master plan, and if we recreate, if the selectmen choose to recreate the housing partnership, they're gonna end up deciding, what it is, through input with other boards, what it is that they're gonna focus on. There might not be an appetite at that point that the town wants to go forward with a production plan.
Okay, I just didn't
mean,
know, yeah.
People may say, no, we don't want to be tied to a production plan. We don't want to be,
I guess my concern was the price point study is so specific, and it said it's $25,000 to $100,000. I didn't want to do it first and say, oh, but now we've done the production plan, and we've done the impact, and that's not going to work with that. I just wanted to make sure the cart doesn't come before the horse. And it's just the way it's laid out in the implementation. So I didn't know if it should be changed to moderate too, so you do the other studies first. And I know when it comes down to it, they'll probably do it in order, but,
Oh, right, here it is.
I just think I understand your concern
right?
about wanting to understand how all these pieces fit together and what are they getting done, but I really think that the implementation committee, when it gets around to looking at all the implementation items, will figure out a lot of this detail, taking into account the timing and everything
Okay.
relative to it. And if they have to come back with recommendations for changes in sequencing or something like that to make more sense, then I think they'll do that.
So we probably shouldn't have sequenced all this stuff. Really?
Well,
Well, I don't think we really
we didn't sequence.
did. I mean, that was that whole discussion about prioritizing
Right.
and not prioritizing specifically.
It was
So
It was a.
the important thing is it's there.
To estimate the timeframe in which these things would take place.
I think the priority was around what we thought was the most important stuff to get to early, and the moderate stuff was things to get to later, and the other stuff was things to get to further down the road. And I think, at least as far as housing, we just thought that a lot of the stuff in housing was important stuff we had to discuss, so we tended to prioritize a lot of the housing recommendations as short-term and high priority.
Right, but the fiscal and the municipal study came moderate, and became medium term, so I just felt like that had to be done before the other plan.
In some sense, I mean, we aren't going to go out and suddenly construct a massive amount of housing that's going to
Right.
infrastructure and schools that route. So I think there's going to be some, over time, an understanding and assessment of what those impacts are going to be. And we might start doing some housing, but it wouldn't necessarily be the full amount, phased kind of thing, and taking into account what the infrastructure actually is.
Okay, as long as they do that, that's,
Yeah.
I just felt like some of the steps were out of
I
order,
don't think we could do anything right because we have to be able to afford all of it, so.
right?
So being mindful of the time, and just as a reminder, what comes out of here is just going to be a written recommendation back to the planning board on what we thought about the changes that were put before us. Given the timing of it, by agreement, it would come from Rick and I with the assistance of Kathy. We'll get it out to all of you. We're not having another meeting, so you would not be able to respond to all, even if you just found an I dotted wrong or a T wrong, because we can't deliberate behind closed doors through email. You can email Kathy individually if you see something that, I don't know what meeting you were at, Fran, but that's not what we said, type comment. Amy, do you have any others that you feel that you need
Not really.
clarification and/or input from this committee before you go before your planning board?
Not
meeting?
really.
All right. Donnie, Jeffrey, do you have anything else that you want to bring up?
Well, Amy, you just brought up the higher density versus the high density.
Okay, yep.
I just wanted to touch upon that because the higher density is just multifamily and high density consolidated together.
Mhm.
The text and the table are both correct. We're referring to high-density residential declining by 0.5%. That's actually correct, 'cause it's not referring to higher density. So I think maybe the resolution is you probably just want it extracted.
Well, either like add it to the table, yeah, whatever you're calling out in the paragraph, or
So,
call out in the paragraph what you had in the table. Because what you had in the table in the paragraph, one was missing.
right, so for example, she's referring to
3, I think.
2-1. So this table here. So higher density residential, as the footnote denotes, is comprised of high density residential, which is housing on less than a quarter acre lot, and multifamily residential. So they were combined.
Okay.
So what the text says is something okay, here it is. Meanwhile, low density residential grew by 31.8%, and medium density residential and high density residential declined by 25.3% and 0.5%. So I think Amy was saying that the 0.5% decline is not
I just thought we should
reflected
add it to
here.
the table.
So, but this is higher, this
Yeah.
is high.
Yeah.
So to avoid maybe to avoid confusion, if you want to extract it to show the actual numbers for multifamily and for high density residential, just to avoid confusion.
Or can you
Well-
just do a line of high
well,
density residential?
Well, high density is about acreage, less than a quarter acre lot. Multifamily is multifamily. It could be on more than a quarter acre lot, right? It's just considered higher density because they're two right next to each other.
Yeah,
Okay.
essentially, yeah.
All right, I mean, for what its purpose is as one of the multiple tools used, I guess it's up to people whether they want the consultants to change the again, it's gonna be up to the planning board whether they change it. We're not necessarily making any changes.
I just
Well, I
thought the
have-
text and table should match. If it says higher density in the table, the paragraph should have higher density. Versus now we're pulling out high and giving it a footnote.
But, I guess we should argue the point, because it's what is the intent? What are you trying to get at?
Well, I was wondering what the intent was to use something that's not in the table and add it to the paragraph. I guess that was my question, what was the intent of not matching the text of the table? Why was it chosen to have high density there versus higher density that's listed in the table?
Once again, I think, Donnie, if you feel you can make a change that makes it clearer, doesn't affect the integrity of the report, I don't think there's any reason why.
I mean, just people might read it and say, well, it says this here, but that there.
Well, we could read the footnote.
It makes it look like the data doesn't match the
All
table.
right, Rick is recommending that the consultants try to make a new chart that they can then pass over to the planning board for their consideration to be added to the final document. I think I'll take that as a motion, if somebody wants to second it.
I'm not sure it's a new, I'm not sure it's a new chart.
It's-
We're gonna
It's
add-
called,
we're gonna
it's
add-
called parallelism. Can we just make sure that the consultants review the table and the text to ensure parallelism between the two? And that's my motion.
Second.
Okay, I think that's what's being done right now, but, okay.
It's a simple fix.
Yeah.
Right,
Not a new table.
right.
All right, so that was a motion and a second, just worded differently. All those in favor? All those opposed? And I'll just say I'm opposed because it makes sense to me the way it is. All right, anything else that anyone else, well, no, not what anyone else has. Those were the only comments that came out of the planning board's multiple meetings of discussion. Again, they're open to our concerns, recommendations, or edits, and they'll do with it what they will on the 18th. If you have nothing else to do, you can watch it on local cable, or you can come on down. Before we adjourn, we do need to consider the minutes from the November 13th, 2019 meeting that were mailed out to everyone previously.
I move to accept the minutes.
Thank you, George. Do I hear a second?
Second.
And you're a second from Norm. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay,
Wish I wasn't here, so I
okay. All right, all right, Justin and Mark abstained. All right, does anybody, all right, so that is it. I just, again, I'll thank everyone again for all your hard work on this project. It was a long time coming, but I think the ink is drying.
Oh, no. Well, maybe,
Motion to
but.
adjourn? Second? All those in favor? Thank you very much.
I do think the presentation was good.
Thank you, Dave.
That was-